Says we're live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Edge webinar series. So in these conversations, we look at the intersection between women, leadership, work, organisation and life habits that help us to live a more fulfilled and happy life. And today we're going to look at something that's really central to that whole idea of living a happy and fulfilled life, which is how we think about life, the thoughts we use, the thoughts that then trigger the emotions that trigger our habits. And that can be encapsulated in a term called positive intelligence. You know, how can we harness the power of more positive thinking for better life outcomes? So I'm delighted to be joined today by Jill Saville, who I met a year ago when I was launching my book, and I was on her podcast show at the time, which is the Leadership Woman with Jill Saville, and it was a great conversation, and we just connected at such a wonderful level. So I was very excited when Jill agreed to join me today to have this conversation around how we can harness the power of our thoughts for better outcomes. So I'll just get us both on the screen. So Jill, thank you very much for joining me today.
And you're most welcome.
So let's just hear a bit about you. Tell us a bit about your life, about your background, about what you do with people now.
I'm an executive coach. I'm also a trainer in 3 different areas. So they are leadership, communications, and more recently, mindset. And you've already mentioned I'm the host of the Leadership Woman podcast, which I really enjoy. I meet lots of people like you. And my main purpose really in life is to develop more women into senior leadership positions. I feel that the comment about, well, we can't find women or there's not enough women in the pipeline, I'm trying to work on the pipeline.
Yeah. And as you know, as we did in our conversation last year, and just to say to anyone who's listening now or in the playback, Jill's podcast is really inspirational. She has some great guests on there. She has some great conversations. It's a very easy listening. So I'd really recommend you going and subscribing to that podcast. But yeah, I mean, that was something I was very passionate about when I launched the Female Edge last year, around how can we help women to get into the leadership positions, to get into positions of influence, to just help us with society. Because I believe with more equality, not just with gender, but I think gender's like the spike of the iceberg for all diversity traits to be acknowledged and valued. But if we can get more women in positions of power, we can certainly help to create more equality and more inclusion in society generally. So very much in line with your thinking there.
I agree. I was just going to say that's probably why we click, because we are very much aligned. And as I remind myself and others, we're not a minority, women. You know, we're not a minority. Why shouldn't we be part of a more balanced world?
Yeah, I think we're 52% of the population.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, very much so. So just a little bit before we delve into the subject, is your background is interesting, even in how you got into coaching and what you were doing before you got into that. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about that, because even your journey into leadership coaching was a very interesting one.
Well, I started life in the public sector, which I won't talk too much about, other than I always found the public sector was quite aligned with me and who I was. So even though I stumbled into it by accident because my mother worked there, I stayed there happily for 32 years. And then I moved to France. I'd already trained as a coach, and I was looking around thinking, so what can I do now? How do I build a business? I've been employed, you know, and you have that employee mindset, but now you've got to find your own work. And coincidentally, John Maxwell, who I've never heard of, was putting adverts on LinkedIn to say he was going to start the John Maxwell team. So he was looking for people who wanted to be coaches and speakers and trainers. And at that time, I had no idea of being a speaker or a trainer. But I joined, and actually that was the best thing I've ever done. But one thing that held me back was that he was like a guru in leadership. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not a leader. That word, I was embarrassed by it. I thought it had nothing to do with me. Leaders didn't look like me. And it was only when I started to listen to him and read his books that I got this idea that leadership was more about putting your hand up to take responsibility and to serve other people. And you're really there to develop your team. I thought, well, actually, okay, I can get on board with that. And I started to put my hand up for more responsible roles. So, and then, because I was always talking about leadership when I was out and about in Luxembourg, that's what I became known for. And I'm probably jumping to something you were going to ask me later, but one of my friends was talking about me one day, and this woman said, "Oh, Jill Saville, you mean the leadership woman?" And that was a few years ago, and I thought, oh my goodness, that's such a big phrase. No, I'm not so sure. But when I was setting up my podcast a couple of years ago during COVID to still get my voice out, I thought, I wonder if I can actually step into, you know how we grow, I wonder if I can step into that big, it felt a big space, leadership. But I'm happy to say I went with it, and that's what I called it, and it's developed since then.
Yeah. And, you know, I think what you've shared will really resonate with a lot of women. A number of things you said there. One of the things about, you know, when it was thinking about leadership, it's like, oh, that's not people like me. That's somebody else out there. And I think there's a whole range of reasons why women feel that. But some of it is because we don't see that many women like us in these leadership roles. So we don't see ourselves as the leader. And that reticence to own it as well, that, you know, even you were saying about that internal dialogue you had to have with yourself when you called it the leadership woman, is like, can I even own that phrase? It's very pertinent, I think, to a lot of women where they struggle to see themselves in that role.
Yes, and one thing I should mention here was John Maxwell used to use a very small phrase that leadership is influence. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And that we all have influence with someone. So we all know how to build relationships and connections and get buy-in and ultimately influence them. So his idea was that anybody could become a leader if you can develop those skills. It's something you can learn. Yeah.
Completely. And anyone who's the mother of a toddler will know how important influence and skills are. So I think not just mothers, fathers as well. We have to influence sometimes the children we're bringing up. So, you know, we learn a lot even from the domestic sphere about leadership. And I really like that, you know, it's about influence, because I always say the simplest way I talk about leadership is it's getting things done through others. So it's like we need something done. It's not something we're personally going to do, but there's a whole range of people in our organisation that we need to do it, that we're in our sphere of influence. And influence is the biggest part of that. Is like, how do we delegate to them or encourage them or support them in a way that they feel happy to do what we need them to do to get the job done. So I think influence is a huge part of that.
It is. And it also explains why when we first meet people, we don't particularly have influence. Nobody's going to follow us off a cliff or wherever when we've just met people. So it's all about building that trust and connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, unless our reputation precedes us, we've got to build that up over time. Yeah.
That's a good point. We could borrow influence from somebody else, but as John said, doesn't really last. You then have to gain your own credibility.
Completely. You still got to then justify the currency of people getting your attention. So we talked about all sorts of things, because you obviously are highly experienced. You have a whole range of things and a range of ways that you support people. But one of the things we hit on in our conversation when we were preparing for this was that idea of positive intelligence. So tell us a bit about how you got involved with that subject, and what was it about it that interested you?
I think that most coaches are always on the lookout for how to develop next. I mean, when I first trained as a coach, I just thought, okay, I'm a coach now. But then I soon realized that I needed to keep developing me. So I moved into things like process communication. I did brain-based coaching with the Neuro Leadership Institute, and conversational intelligence. Then more latterly, I stumbled on a book called Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Chamine, because I again saw an advert, I think it came across the ether on LinkedIn, that was saying he'd been granted some millions of dollars to train coaches for free in this new idea that he developed. And I thought, okay, and I found that it fitted with everything else that I'd been doing. And I like that. I like things when they go step by step. And so, yes, that's how I got into it. I started to be trained as a coach in it, I think probably November 2020 I began.
Yeah. And tell us, what is it about it that you think has value to people? Why should they be interested in it?
I think the simplicity of it and how it fits with other things. So Shirzad said he would love the whole world, every human being, to be trained in meditation. But you're not going to sell that really to many people. Everybody's busy. And the thing with positive intelligence is that there's a whole, there's an application, most things have got apps now on phones, but this application is there to get you to develop new habits every day. New habits by just listening to something for 2 minutes. And 2 minutes, morning, noon, afternoon, And then also there's like a mental gym that you can go in and you can do various things. But the whole point is to move us out of our head, where thoughts can drive us mad and we're ruminating, and take us out of our emotions, because we tend to be driven by our emotions, and that can be a circle, and move us into our senses. So all of these PQ reps, repetitions, are based on trying to get us into our 5 senses, our visual, touch, and this, that, the other, away from thought and emotion. And that has a knock-on effect, because the idea is that this enhances our performance, this enhances our well-being, and this enhances our relationships.
Yeah. And I'm a very strong advocate of meditation and mindfulness, and I encourage it with my corporate clients and my personal clients. But you're right, a lot of people still see it as something that's very esoteric, very out there, very much not something that they either feel comfortable with or feel like they have the time. But what you've just described is and it'd be interesting to just see some of the techniques there, is sometimes it's just a matter of being aware of yourself in the moment. I mean, I always say mindfulness is being aware of the moment whilst you're in the moment with an open and non-judgmental mind, just allowing it to be, which is some of what you described. But people then think, well, if I sit and be quiet, my mind gets in the way and then I get frustrated and then I can't do it. But what you've described is getting into your emotion, getting into your senses, which is another way of doing that. It's like, you know, am I aware of my hands? As they contact with my legs at the moment? Am I aware of what I can hear as well as our conversation? Am I aware of what I can sense and smell, and just being aware of that in the moment is already very, very grounding. But it's something we really struggle to do. Is that what you find as well? People really struggle with that.
Well, not people, me. Because to just sit and calm your mind, and just a few seconds and your mind has hopped off and it's thinking about, you know, what you're trying to forget anyway. So it is really about habit, because like the way we clean our teeth in the morning, that's a habit, we don't think about it. The way we think is also a habit. And we can change that habit, but like all habits, it takes an awful lot of work. And one thing that I should mention here, he talks about the saboteurs that we have, the voices in our heads. And you can hear this is linked to so many other things that we do. So these saboteurs have developed over time to protect us. So there's reasons for them. But they tend to be negative. They tend to be the part of us that we get things done because it's kicking us, you know. And the whole point is, if we can move into the positive side, the sages, then we get things done in a more relaxed, calm, excited way. I think I read somewhere that worry and excitement are like two sides of the same coin. Your body is doing things in the same way, so let's be excited instead.
It's like that thing, that wisdom around it takes far less muscles to smile than it does to frown, but we still frown.
No, we do, because it's a habit. Look at this.
But I think that thing around thoughts, I'm just going to just pull that out a bit more of you, because again, this is such powerful stuff. So our habitual thinking gets into grooves in terms of things that happen. So what are called ants, automatic negative thoughts, and how they are there. So, you know, typical of if we get out of bed and we feel that we're rushed and we're going to be late, and, you know, we're worrying about what's going to happen in the first Zoom or the first meeting we're going to. And it's like, oh, that's typical. I'm late. I'm never going to be there. I'm not prepared enough. So these sort of thoughts like run away with themselves, and they're taking up all of our mental energy to the point where there's very little energy for us to be in the moment of, but what can I do to prepare? What can I do to be, you know, fully able and prepared and available for the conversation that I'm going to have? So they really do suck the energy out of us, but they're things that we are only able to interrupt. And I'm going to get into the interruption bit, because that's what you're hinting at with some of these. They run away with themselves unless we find ways to interrupt them. And I think that's the biggest thing, is like ants, as I call them, these automatic negative thoughts are like hardwired, you know, from childhood, from our relationships with our family, from our early experiences in the workplace. And they can be very hard to take them out of their grooves and then find another way of thinking about things. But what you're hinting at is finding ways to interrupt them. And you mentioned one way, which is getting in the moment and thinking with your senses. So how do my fingers feel? How do they feel on my leg? How does the contact with my seat feel? Where is my back in relation to the chair? So all the things that help us to get into our thinking of the present moment helps us. But are there other ways we can interrupt them thoughts as well?
What you mentioned there about groove is absolutely right. I know that there's a really useful picture that the brain and the connections in the brain, and there's a line, and it comes to a point, and you can go negative, which is the groove that is most practiced. Why? Because it's our survival instinct, and so it's kept us safe. So it's much harder to get it to go to the positive. And that's the whole point of this mental training, so that more often it goes the opposite way. And if I can just give you a very, very recent example, because I do try to practice what I preach, I guess. And we're going through one or two health issues with my father at the moment. And we were sat waiting for him to go through tests, my sister and I, yesterday. We're sat in the sun. And my sister was quite stressed and worried naturally. And I said to her, you know, what I try to do is, in the absence of any other information, I assume that it's going to be okay. And I really tried to sit. The sun was there. I could feel the sun on my skin. I said to her, can you feel the breeze across your face? And just to try to be in the moment, because it's all too easy to be in the what if. Yeah. But as you said earlier, that drains us, so that if the worst happens, we're actually left with no resources. So, yes. Did that answer that question?
Yeah, and it's a great example of it, you know, I mean, that's a very current one for you, that you were facing a health issue, waiting for things, and it's like, let us just get into this moment now of what we can recognize around us that is good. Because the ego part of our mind, so that's the everyday, the protective part of my mind, is not really interested in the present moment. That's some of the issue about why it gets into these grooves. It's interested in future and past, and it's constantly oscillating between them 2 points. And as soon as we get into the now, so that senses and being aware of what's happening, we're outside of the ego, and that's where we can find the resources to respond to things in a more appropriate way. So I think that's a fantastic example there. Yeah. And have you got any other habits or things that you found actually help you with harnessing positive intelligence?
The things that he teaches us to do through because the whole point, yes, there's an app, and yes, it gets you into the habit, but ideally you learn to do it without the app. You learn to do it when and where. So one thing is just rubbing together your thumb and a finger really intently, so that you can feel that fingerprint. And your whole focus is trying to feel the fingerprint on both fingers. Only for 10 seconds. He says that even 10 seconds can be enough to move us into the sage powers. Yeah. And would you like me to give you an example of a couple of saboteurs?
Yeah, please. Because it's really helpful for people. Then they can get some practical ideas around it. Yeah.
Yes. I wrote them all down because I haven't got the kind of brain that can just reel 8 things off. So the judge is in all of us, and we know about the judge. We judge ourselves, we judge other people, we judge circumstances. So that's a main saboteur, and it's forever talking, you know. Look at her. Who does she think she is? Why is she wearing that dress? You know, we've got this in us. And then there are things that are based on, they're developed from something good. So we all want to do a brilliant job. We all want to achieve mastery and excellence. So there's one saboteur that's hyperachiever, that like tips that over so that it's negative. It's always looking for the next thing. You never congratulate yourself or celebrate anything for having gone so far, because your ego is, or you mentioned ego, is all wrapped up with your last achievement. And this particularly hits us when we lose our jobs, when our ego is wrapped up in what did we achieve last week, and you know, what did we produce, and all of a sudden we're not producing anything. So I really like positive intelligence, because it's like reminding ourselves that we have value anyway. It's not about our last achievement. So that's one thing. And another, I'll just mention one more, which women tend to have this more than men, which is pleaser.
Yeah. Oh
Like
gosh.
to
Absolutely.
please
Yeah.
other people. So if we can get out of those saboteurs and move into the sage power, so one sage power is empathy, not just for other people, but empathy for ourselves. Don't beat yourself up.
Yeah. Really powerful. And I just want to go back to that people pleaser one for a moment, because people might think, well, it's nice to be pleasing other people. Absolutely is. It's really nice to be considerate to other people and helping them. But when we do it to the detriment of our own needs, it's no longer a healthy thing to do. And that's what happens with people pleasers, is they are reaching in to do whatever is needed for the other person, and they're so anxious about pleasing the other person. They not only create a whole load of negative energy going into that relationship, but they're wearing themselves out trying to read somebody's mind and trying to make them really happy, when the only person we can ever make really happy is ourselves.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, if there was one takeaway, if there was one habit or one idea you would like people to be left with so that they could harness it a bit more, what would it be?
I think that if you remember, I think it's what you said earlier, that we tend to live in the past and in the future. But life is now, and the only part of life that we can influence is today. If we're ever trying to do a long-term goal or take baby steps, the only time we can do that is now. And so I would urge people to practice being more in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add one more tip to that, which I found has been beneficial, is a way to interrupt thoughts, particularly negative ones, particularly anxious ones, whenever we're facing some challenge, is to have some simple mantra that we can say over and over again, even if it doesn't feel entirely true for us right now. And simple ones can be, all is well, I am enough. All is well, I am enough. All is well, I am enough. And just repeating that. And that just takes us out of that negative thinking groove. It's an interrupter. So simple mantras or affirmations can also help to just lift us out of it enough for new energy to come in, and then find a way to actually respond to it in the right way. So I'm a great believer in affirmations.
So, I agree. I certainly use the I am enough or it's good enough. If you're one of these avoiders and procrastinators, it's good enough, let it go. Any
perfectionist who's listening, that's a very good one for you. So you mentioned a couple of things there, and I just wanted to pull them out before I give people our contact details. One of them was the book. So the book is called Positive Intelligence.
It is by Shirazad Shamin.
Shamin, S-H-A-M-I-N, is it?
C-H-A-M-I-N.
Very good. Okay.
Shirazad, S-H-I-R-Z-A-D.
Yeah. So very good. So that will obviously be on Amazon. And then you've mentioned an app as well. So if people wanted to find this app to try it out, what's the app called?
So you can't get access to the app unless you go to a positive intelligence coach.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But what you can do is, and it might be useful for you to put the link up, I'll give it to you. What you can do is go onto the Positive Intelligence website and you can do a short test to see what your top saboteurs are.
Yeah.
So it will give you them in order, and you'll recognize them.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll put them into the comments at the end of the event, so that if people wanted to do that, they could do that. Fantastic. So thank you very much for that. I mean, absolutely brilliant in terms of some of the ideas and some of the tips that you've shared. We'd encourage anyone who's listening now or in the playback to keep the conversation going. So if you want to get in touch with Jill, you can find her on email, jill@jillsaville.com. Her website's the same, jillsaville.com. You can find her on LinkedIn, the same, Jill Saville. And then the podcast is The Leadership Woman with Jill Saville. So you can find that on Podbean, on Apple, on Spotify, on all of the main platforms. And it's very easy to subscribe to that, and you'll hear lots of other interesting conversations. You're all familiar with me, Mary Agents to Change, and Mary Maguire on LinkedIn. So we'd love to hear from you. If you've got any comments, please do add them and we'll come back and respond. But thank you very much for your time today, and we're both wishing you a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.